The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar. India's recalibration towards Russia and China, strategic autonomy at play. India's foreign policy has traditionally been driven by strategic autonomy, maintaining independence in international relations without aligning with any particular bloc. But recent global complexities and growing US, Russian and Chinese rivalries have prompted India to reassess its stance towards Moscow and Beijing. How are India's evolving ties with Russia and China influencing its foreign policy? And what does the deepening Sino-Russian relationship mean for India's strategic autonomy in a China-centric security scenario? Join our live debate to explore these and related issues, sharing your questions and comments with our expert panel.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Humphrey Hawksley, and this is a Democracy Forum debate where we dig deeply into issues and examine the shifts and nuances that could end up rocking or stabilizing our world. And today, India's recalibration towards Russia and China, strategic autonomy at play. Amid talk of a new world order, waning trust in America, where exactly does India stand? So far, it's skillfully balanced its pro-Western pivot with its long-standing security links with Russia. And how much now is it seeking to resolve its historic tensions with China? Is this hedging or shaping a multipolar Asia? And what are the stakes for the foundering West? To give us answers, we have a superb expert channel: Jagannath Panda, Eerishika Pankaj, Sreeram Chaulia, and Amitabh Mattoo. And with us throughout is Democracy Forum Chair and Asia Watcher, Barry Gardiner. And before all that, I'm delighted to ask Democracy Forum President, Lord Charles Bruce, to lay out the background and the canvas of our discussion. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which examines the rebalancing of India's foreign policy objectives. I'm very grateful to the team at TDF for focusing on this issue and the geopolitical consequences for Asia. We are fortunate to be hosting such an eminent panel of experts who will be sharing their perspectives with us today. And I look forward to the discussion to follow under the moderation of Humphrey Hawksley. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the memorandum written by Jawaharlal Nehru in September 1946, which clearly defined strategic non-alignment as the genesis of a future Indian foreign policy, proposing instead, I quote, to keep away from the power politics of groups aligned against one another, which have led to the past to world wars and which may again lead to disasters on an even vaster scale. And at Tianjin in August last year, however, Narendra Modi attended a summit held by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization together with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, prompting commentators to predict a thaw in relations and the formation of a nascent trilateral alliance. And in a message sent to the President of India in April last year, marking 75 years of diplomatic relations, President Xi alluded to a dragon-elephant tango, expressing a willingness to reset the relationship between China and India to become, I quote, partners of mutual achievement. And a communique released by the Indian government to coincide with the Tianjin summit 4 months later reaffirmed, furthermore, that the two countries were development partners and not rivals. But despite the high-flown rhetoric, it is difficult to disguise the fact that in recasting its relations with Beijing, Delhi is responding instead to the reality of its growing geostrategic vulnerability, negotiating from a position of weakness, particularly in defense and trade. As the political scientist Christophe Jaffrelot observes, I quote, rapprochement is now possible because India has resigned itself to seeing China encroach on its territory in the Himalayas and come to the aid of its public enemy number one, Pakistan. And reacting to India's ballooning trade deficit with China, the Observer Research Foundation concludes, I quote, "Giving leeway to China in the economic realm will have several other costs. It tarnishes India's image as a rising power that can withstand Chinese coercion. It undercuts the notion that India can save as a bulwark against Beijing's expansionism and threatens initiatives that include India in the task of rebuilding supply chains outside China." Well, in contrast to the recalibration of relations with China, there is increasing evidence that India's relations with Russia have entered a period of managed decline. Once India's most significant supplier of military hardware, providing 72% of total arms imports in 2010 to 2014, Russia's share of India's imported armaments dropped to 36% by 2020-24, a relationship clearly overshadowed by the invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago. India has continued to import crude oil from Russia despite the imposition of sanctions, and as a consequence was faced with an effective 50% tariff war imposed by the United States in August last year. Although President Trump announced a reduction of tariffs to 18% earlier this month, following a meeting with Narendra Modi in Washington, where he claimed India would halt its imports of Russian oil, I quote, "India's reluctance to confirm such a pledge is fueling deep skepticism among analysts that any substantial cut is imminent," observes the Financial Times. Or as Harsh Pant of the Observer Research Foundation suggests, I quote, "Broadly, India has been diversifying away from Russia, and that process will continue. But if the issue is that immediately India will disrupt oil supply from Russia because of this trade deal, that's unlikely to happen." And as Chatham House infers, I quote, "Trump's policy has made strategic hedging more crucial than ever as the cornerstone of India's foreign policy, as it faces a more uncertain geopolitical environment and a less reliable United States." Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any comments or questions for the panel, please pass them through the chair.
Thank you, Lord Bruce, for that. The 80th anniversary of that memorandum that clearly defined strategic non-alignment. Our first panelist is Professor Jagannath Panda, head of the Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs. He's connected to a myriad of institutions and think tanks that are examining the topics we're talking about today. He's series editor for Routledge Studies on Think Asia, editorial board member of the Journal of Asian Public Policy, and among his latest books and many articles is one co-authored this month entitled Shifting Balances in South Asia. That's exactly what we're debating. India's recalibration towards Russia and China. Jagannath Panda, exactly what is happening?
Humphrey, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you very much for that excellent inaugural speech to Lord Bruce and to the Democracy Forum for this invitation. Let me start with that questions that you are trying to understand, that how to read this recalibration that we are talking about. Whether there is a real recalibration is happening in the context of Indian foreign policy when it comes to Russia and China. I would rather see that this is not entirely kind of recalibration we are talking about, because Russia and China at an independent bilateral level, they has always been partners to India in different forums, in different multilateral forums to the bilateral level. But what is interesting about this recalibration, probably to the extent that this overture in Indian foreign policy is not necessarily a pivot away from the West. West still remain a critical element in Indian foreign policy. India's partnership with the West is still gaining ground. So this is not a pivot away from the West. But what we are seeing probably a new development, a hedge against systemic uncertainty. And this systemic uncertainty that which is really forcing India to recalibrate its relationship with China and Russia. Now, there are two kinds of systemic uncertainty that we need to understand. One is systemic uncertainties which are linked to global realities. And there are two or three different factors are there we need to take into account when talking about India's recalibration towards China and Russia. One is that the decline of the multilateral forums or multilateralism as a space. There, what we need to understand that Russia and China are permanent actors in the United Nations Security Council, and India needs to maintain that kind of equicordial relations with these two actors. So at a space when the multilateralism is on declining and the multilateral forums are not really intact the way they used to be. Second, there is a reassertion of the United Nations as a unipolar, forceful world actor under President Donald Trump. And I think that is a critical factor which is indirectly forcing India to reassess its relationship with China and Russia. The third is we are also seeing a disunity in the Indo-Pacific. And we know for a fact that last 5 to 7 years, or let's say last 1 decade, Indo-Pacific as a unity was evolving. And suddenly there has been a disunity visible because of President Donald Trump and American reassessment towards the Indo-Pacific realities. And I think these are the systemic uncertainty at the global level that is encouraging India to reassess its relationship with China and Russia. But at the same time, there are also local realities, which is enforcing India to look at China and Russia in a new context. One is, I think, the geographic realities. If we try to see from a geographical point of view, both China and Russia are India's neighbor and extended neighbors. We know for a fact that the geography cannot be changed, and geography is something permanent. So the geography comes as a independent but a stable variable in India's recalibration towards China and Russia from time to time. India has to maintain a cordial relationship with China due to the reasons that it is maintaining a very complicated relationship with China. At the same time, when it comes to Russia, I think India also realizes that it is important to continue to have a healthy relationship with Russia, because the kind of strategic support, the kind of strategic backing Russia offers to India in the local realities, particularly in a context of China-Pakistan, bilateral chemistry. I think what more small regions, which is a strong local region, is that I think India's competition with China at the local or at the regional level is definitely expanding, and there is no return from that kind of realities. But I think at the same time, what India realizes is that India needs a partnership with China as much as China needs a partnership with India at the multilateral forums, be it global economic forums, for example, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, be it the BRICS forum, which is already talk of the town, and also in other regional multilateral forums, which gives a little Eurasian kind of realities, the mode of politics to address, that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations. So I think all of these local realities as well as the global realities encourage India to look at Russia and China under the current and the future perspective, and therefore I think the recalibration, the kind of overture we are witnessing in Indian foreign policy is a part and parcel of these realities.
Very much for that. That was very concise. I just want to pick you up on your opening point where you talk less of the West, which we can understand, but also we know that the United States particularly has got an embedded characteristic of either you're with us or against us. And India felt this very strongly in 1971, which set it on the wrong side of the Cold War. How far can India be less of the West without that coming in and it being seen as an enemy if it gets too close to Russia or China?
I don't think India's relationship with the West has really affected that much. As we have recently seen, India's relationship with the EU is on a progressive mode. Recently, we just concluded the FTA negotiation, and hopefully over the next few months or half a year, or over the next 1 year, the signing agreement of this FTA is going to be realized. So I don't think when it comes to West, India has really shied away in terms of compromising in its styles. But I think when it comes to the tensions with China, there is also a realization from India that within the Western clubs, there are powers who could provide strategic as well as diplomatic backups to India, be it United Kingdom, which has been a strong supporter to India, not only in the United Nations Security Council forums, but also at a tactical level when it comes to the Indo-Pacific narrative. I think there is a lot building up between India and UK after we have kind of signed the FTA. Second, I think within the European platform, EU platform, there is a support base which is increasing in favor of India, despite of the fact that most of the European Union countries have realized that India provides a blank support to Russia on the Russia-Ukraine war. But apart from that, India is very much independent and maintains an autonomous status in its foreign policy objectives. So therefore, I think there is a realization that the Western support base is intact and India cannot afford to compromise on that. And this realization is very much keeping in the China threat, China challenge in mind, both in the medium to long-term perspective.
And could I quickly carry on from that thought with a question from Margaret Barry here? India's autonomy could be seen as far-sighted, an early response to an emerging multipolar order. Do you agree with that thought?
To an extent, yes, I do agree. And I think this is also partly drawn from the fact that we also have to take in how the global powers or the other major actors are reacting to the situation, particularly China and the United States. If we talk specifically about China, China is under a lot of stress. Economic slowdown is one factor. Unemployment is rising. And also the Chinese are really very much worried about, over the last 1 decade or so, the way the American containment strategy was evolving. So there is this realization within China that probably, they need certain kind of a stable relationship with India. And India also embraces to that kind of multipolar outlook that China really offers to the regions. So I think I kind of partly agree with that narrative. And second, I think when we talk about American point of view about the world politics, of course, Donald Trump has brought a lot of systemic uncertainty to the practice. But again, the broader American foreign policy has not really moved away from the built-up they have built in the Indo-Pacific regions as a counter narrative to China. So India wants to stay intact and engaged with that classical Indo-Pacific narrative that over the last 1 decade or so India has built. So it's a part and parcel of that multipolar character or the mode of politics that India has to live with.
Fascinating. So we're going to tease out further how much India can carry out this balancing act of Russia, China, and the US, or will it all fall apart? And our second speaker is Eerishika Pankaj, Director of the Organization for Research, China and Asia. That's a Delhi-based think tank that focuses on decoding domestic Chinese politics and its impact on Beijing's foreign policy making. In 2023, she was selected as an emerging Quad think tank leader. And one of her articles this month is entitled Resolutions, What to Expect from the India-China Status Quo in 2026. Will it be a test for the new normal? What exactly is the new normal? Eerishika Pankaj, tell us what you know.
Thank you so much, Humphrey. And before I, attempt to answer your question, I'd also like to thank the Democracy Forum for inviting me. It is a very, very esteemed panel that I'm a part of. Everybody on this panel are people I read on almost on a daily basis. So I'm definitely looking forward to learning a lot from this as well. With respect to the new normal right now in India-China relations very quickly is more about a managed contestation without a, very overt, renegotiation of strategic trust. There has been a lot of trust lost in the bilateral after the 2020 Galwan incident. Moving back to what the main theme of our panel today is, I hope to approach this theme slightly from a different angle, which is again bringing in the China lens. And I want to talk about how India's Russia policy currently is increasingly shaped by the strategic consequences of China's own rise. The logic of India's engagement with Russia is less and less about just Russia itself and more about managing the implications of deepening Sino-Russian convergence within what is a very China-centric security architecture. A central concern in New Delhi is Russia's growing strategic dependence on China. As Moscow's isolation from the West is also increasing, its economic and strategic reliance on the Chinese has all deepened. Now, Russian officials themselves in the past 2 months have described the relationship with China as quote-unquote unprecedented in depth and alignment across Eurasian and global issues. At the same time, Moscow continues to emphasize its privileged strategic partnership with India and has called for reviving the RIC trilateral, which is the Russia-India-China trilateral format. Now, this dual messaging reflects two key things. One, Russia's own interests in avoiding excessive dependence on Beijing. And number two, it creates an important, limited, but very important strategic space for India. Now, this concern, I guess, helps explain what often appears as a paradox to especially European audiences. India continues to purchase Russian energy and sustain defense cooperation, not simply because of the legacy partnership we share with the Russians, but also as a form of strategic denial. The objective is also to retain residual leverage in Moscow and prevent Russia's full absorption into what can be called Chinese strategic orbit. Participation in groupings like BRICS and SCO also similarly reflects Indian presence, but without full and complete alignment, essentially remaining inside Eurasian platforms to avoid ceding institutional space to just Chinese agenda dominance. And at the same time, India's external environment is, as Dr. Panda also mentioned, reinforcing the need for diversification, I think. The United States has been India's largest export market, remains a critical partner across avenues, especially tech and maritime balancing. Still, recent developments are illustrating how both the pressure that the US is implementing on India and also the limits of that pressure. For example, US tariff threats have been linked, of course, to Russian oil purchases, and they did initially compress India's room for maneuver. I think Lord Bruce was also mentioning this, that Indian import patterns did adjust at the end of 2025. I think Russian oil imports had fallen to almost a 38-month low, while US oil imports did rise sharply despite being costlier. But now there's been a recent Supreme Court ruling in the US that is showing the legal constraints on executive tariff authority. And this could potentially weaken the use of these unilateral economic coercions. So what does this mean for us? Once those pressures have eased, can we expect Indian energy choices to revert to price security and diversification logic rather than attempting to do compliance signaling? This shift reflects a broader pattern to me, an adjustment of Indian strategic autonomy under pressure, followed by re-expansion of that autonomy once these structural constraints have changed. And India's Russia policy in this regard operates within a triangular constraint. China's rise is pushing India towards the United States for external balancing. US unpredictability is encouraging India to retain Russia as a strategic insurance. And the Sino-Russian convergence in itself is increasing the urgency to prevent Moscow's complete alignment with Beijing. And on this note, I'd just like to also add, because the work that I do and my think tank does, we focus a lot on what is happening inside China. What are the Chinese saying about all of these topics? So Chinese academic discourse has been interpreting India's strategy very differently when it comes to Russia. Much of the literature has argued that India's growing engagement with the Indo-Pacific framework and expanding cooperation with the US indicates a very long-term and permanent drift towards the sort of Western camp. In this view, India's engagement with Russia is instrumental to the Chinese and residual to the Chinese, which they think is sustained only to the extent that Moscow continues to serve India's strategic interests. At the same time, Chinese analysts are also cognizant of the fact that there are limits to such alignment. They are expecting India to maintain defense and energy cooperation with Russia in order to preserve bargaining authority vis-a-vis Washington. The deeper interpretation, as per our reading of Chinese writing in this, is that India's strategic posture, as they are expecting, will continue to oscillate between major power centers as the balance of power evolves. Now, this divergence is significant that the Chinese have identified, and it shows that they do view India as drifting, and that is the narrative that they are looking to push, which also reaches Russian audiences. But from the Indian side, the goal is to show that India is stabilizing the margins of its strategic space. And I guess the key point with which I'd like to sort of conclude my opening remarks is that India's Russia policy is best currently understood not as just non-alignment or just multi-alignment, but as structural hedging against the geopolitical consequences of China's own rise. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I take advantage, Eerishika, of your expertise to just ask you that the current purges, if that's the right word, military purges that are going on in China, is that weakening or strengthening China's position? Does it change this balance that we're talking about?
Right. That's a very interesting question, and a lot of members of my team, especially one member of my team, does very excellent work on Chinese anti-corruption campaigns. But I think what we can tell, what my reading of these purges is specifically, is that you take the example of the military parade that became such a big spectacle right after the SCO. And, while you are showing the, top of the line military gear and military equipment that you have, the immediate purging of two major generals right after the military parade shows to any China watcher that you may have the equipment, but Xi Jinping does not trust the people who are expected to handle that equipment. I mean, the CMC currently is just one main member, and from the original 7 that there used to be. And I think that this does show to us that there is a certain level of weakening in Xi's own trust in his military commanders, but at the same time it also shows his power. He is purging not because he's purging, and he will continue purging till he feels confident that the CMC is one that he can completely handle. And with the centennial anniversary in 2027 coming up, this is a very major point that we have to keep watching. Currently, what shows us weakness at the same time also shows the strength.
Yes, so one can, if this is right, that China's military or its strategic thinking is not that strong at the moment because they're re-establishing all these sort of military lines. Can I ask you one other question? How far do you think India can go in setting up this sort of structural relationships between Russia, China, and itself without weakening the Quad, or is it already weakened?
I think that the Quad currently is a very nascent initiative. Of course, it's very new if you actually look at how long some of the others have been around, and it is in its trust building era. Especially if you go to somewhere in ASEAN and ask them what they think about the Quad. So currently, with every change in government when it comes to the Quad, there is this fear that the Quad establishment may not continue, or the new government of these countries may not have the same priorities when it comes to the Quad, and we are seeing that currently with the Trump administration in the US. But at the same time, India, Japan, and Australia remain very committed to ensuring that the Quad, moves forward. And when we talk about the RIC, to be very honest, is a very, old mechanism. It doesn't serve any output value. It doesn't serve any real-time output value. It is more a diplomatic tool that if India does choose to, take up the Russian invitation and engage in, it is very sensitive. You're just one border clash away from that falling apart again.
Thank you very much for that. Stay with us, because we are going to come back to you as this debate develops. Right now, we're going to a very short break and then on to our third contributor. And welcome back, everybody. Our third contributor on this debate on India navigating its relationships with Russia and China, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Among his many books are Friends, India's Closest Strategic Partners, and Crunch Time, Narendra Modi's National Security Crises. He is also the host of the Indian Diplomacy television show on the Doordarshan channel. So he will know what he's talking about. How should India navigate this increasingly precarious balancing act? Sreeram Chaulia, give us your argument.
Well, thank you, Humphrey. It's great to be with you on your show. I think, it's fair to say that we are in very volatile and uncertain times. So I think it's been a hard learning curve for India these last few years, especially given that we had a core assumption, which was that the United States will bring together like-minded strategic partners and allies together as part of a large counterbalancing effort to push back Chinese expansionism in Asia or in the Indo-Pacific. Now, this assumption to some extent still holds. As we know, India-US defense cooperation, they have like more than 50 different dialogue mechanisms, strategic minerals. We have just been brought into the Pax Silica grouping, which is spearheaded by the US for semiconductors and rare earths and all these things to, again, shield the members from Chinese brinkmanship and blackmail. And then I think there's a whole range of intelligence and technology and advanced semiconductors. The AI summit that India just hosted had a massive presence of US big tech, and American big tech is betting big on India and is committing to something like 70 or almost $80 billion or something like that to invest in India as a major center for AI development. So I'm just giving you a few of these examples where some of the pillars of the old assumption still hold. Where it has gone sour is on the matter of trade, and here, the tariffs from the US government have not gone down well in India, and it has whipped up a lot of nationalist outrage, and also a kind of a sense that, we cannot really trust the Americans fully to back us in any kind of a long-term competition against China. So there is this view. In fact, last year in 2025, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar came up with the concept of the three selves, and it's all about self-reliance, self-protection, and self-confidence. And this, of course, harks back to the idea of strategic autonomy, which is the theme of our debate here. So what he was saying essentially is that, while we have partnerships and while we have allies, there's, not all of them are problem-free. And in fact, Dr. Jaishankar, when he launched my book, Friends, he made a very significant observation at the speech of the book launch, where he said, some friends are more complicated than others, and obviously is referring to the US in particular. So I think we have had to readjust or recalibrate, as your theme says, with regard to the US drift away from the sure shot coalition building that we had assumed it would do. And because the US is not following the classic liberal foreign policy that one expects it from it, there is a sense that we need to also manage our problems with China. So there's no doubt about it. And the second Trump term has made that quite clear. Even during the first Trump term, there were confrontation between China and India at the tri-junction with Bhutan in a place called Doklam in 2017. And the Trump administration really did not make a clear-cut position in favor of India at the time, and it was because Trump was at the time hunting for the same old thing, which was a trade deal with China. So given his obsession with trade deals and with trade deficits and with tariffs, it is difficult for us to imagine that the US will fully counterbalance China like it was assumed to be in the past. So what do we do if the US is not fully committed to counterbalancing China, or is divided internally with the MAGA crowd and the Trump, his own inner circle, wanting to maybe cut a deal with China and not worry about counterbalancing China, but on the other hand, the permanent establishment and the deep state, as they call it, still going with the traditional path of China as the pacing adversary, which must be stopped at all costs. What do we do? Well, we have 3 more years of Trump, and so therefore it's not likely that the so-called liberal America will come back anytime very soon. So therefore, I think we are looking to mend fences with the Chinese. It doesn't mean end of competition. It doesn't mean we are still vying a lot for influence in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region and across the Indo-Pacific. So, in most of these countries, the Indians present themselves as the alternatives to China. And India is teaming up with a lot of these countries that we discussed, including Quad partners, but also especially Japan, to try and push back Chinese influence in its own backyard in countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. So I think, we will do that. We'll continue to do that because geography is a given and we are in the same space. It's not like, Brazil is rising, right? Brazil is rising, but it's like thousands of miles away. But China has already risen and it's right next door. It has territorial claims on us and is, on an expansionist tendency, on a trend. So therefore, I think we will look to compete with them very hard for influence in places like Nepal or Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Maldives, just to name a few. And I think we will look to make sure the balance of power in Asia or in Pacific does not become very, very adverse to India, regionally speaking. As far as the Russia factor goes, I concur with my co-panelists that, Russia historically has been valuable for India as a kind of a counterbalance to Chinese predominance in Eurasia and in our extended neighborhood. So you have like regions like Central Asia, you have where Russia actually historically has a significant play there, and we would not want Russia to weaken or to collapse altogether under the weight of the Western sanctions or the pushback over Ukraine, because then it will leave us with less cards to play or to subtly counterbalance the Chinese. So I think with Russia, we are going to sustain the relationship. But Russia is not the great power that it used to be. France has, almost caught up or is going to overtake Russia as our number one defense partner. And the point is, France is a NATO member country. And so we are doing a lot more with the UK as well. It has been mentioned that with the EU itself, we now have a greater focus on Indo-Pacific to jointly work to implement projects, and also in defense. We have now got a EU-India strategic and defense partnership. So I think if you add up all these, I will simply say that we are still aligned with the US and with the Western camp. We are not non-aligned, definitely not. And we will never be aligned with China. And we will remain aligned with Russia. I keep saying, multi-alignment means alignment with everyone except with China. There's no question of China becoming a partner or a friend of India for the reasons I've outlined, which is directly structural, which is geopolitical and has to do with geography. And also, the Chinese have a superiority complex. They believe that, they have the rights to shape the regional order. And I don't think India will be willing to play second fiddle. If it is fiercely independent vis-a-vis a Donald Trump, it will be permanently independent vis-a-vis a Xi Jinping or whoever succeeds in, because the US does not have territorial claims on us. The US does not try to pressurize us or provide weapons to Pakistan, and the US does not is in no way making life difficult for us or preventing our rise. Our view is that Chinese have a zero-sum approach in Asia and do not want India to rise, and therefore, in the long run, despite this recalibration or efforts to mend fences or maybe avoid war with the Chinese and do some limited cooperation, it will always be limited due to these factors. So Russia will matter for us, and even more so, I believe US and Europe will matter for us in this long-term effort to make sure that we continue growing and are not boxed in by Chinese pressure or domination.
Thank you very, very much for that. I just want to give you a very quick question for the audience, Anand Singh Tomar. If Russia stays neutral in any India-China conflict, how would that affect or change the India-Russia security partnership? Very quickly, please.
Yeah, no, Russia has so far not backed away from giving us what we have asked from them in terms of defense supplies and material. Russia is still dangling the 5th generation fighter jet to India. We don't yet have one yet, and we are still not decided. And there are rumors that we may go for a Russian option. I don't know. I mean, France is also content.
So I would relationship stayed solid since 1971, has it? That's a trusted, long relationship.
Yeah. There was a dip in the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but it's been restored to a great extent. But like I said, it's more competitive. India is also trying to extract better benefits from Russia by saying, hey, we've got France, we got Israel, we got the US, and so many other players, right? So the Russians understand this bargaining game too. So
thank you. Just because we're running out of time. Thanks so much for that, and I want to come back to you at the end. But on to our final speaker now, Professor Amitabh Mattoo, the Dean at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and one of the few academics who bridges that gap between academia and public policy. His advice is sought at the highest levels of decision-making in India. He's published 12 books and over 50 research articles in international affairs. His latest, one of his latest, Strategic Choices, Ethical Dilemmas, Stories from the Mahabharata. Mattoo was a member of the task force constituted by the Prime Minister of India on global strategic development. So, India's recalibration towards Russia and China. Professor Amitabh Mattoo, share with us your expertise.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. And Lord Bruce, and all my distinguished fellow panelists. As a last speaker, let me try and put the whole debate within a larger context. For I think we gather at a time when the world appears to stand between chapters, when the certainties that once seemed durable now appear increasingly provisional, and when nations must look beyond comforting assumptions to the harder realities beneath. History, in its stern wisdom, reminds us that periods of transition reward those who possess steadiness of purpose and indeed clarity of mind. In that sense, India approaches this moment not as a supplicant to circumstance, but as a nation resolved to shape its destiny with, I think, patience, confidence, and an unblinking view of the world as it is. Let's speak plainly. The international landscape is marked by intense rivalries, contested rules, and the unmistakable return of hard-headed clinical power politics. The notion that global order could be sustained indefinitely by habit alone has given way to the recognition that stability must be constantly renewed and, when necessary, defended. Consider, if you will, the lesson offered by the recent experience in the United States. The turbulence and the policy oscillations associated with President Donald Trump on alliances, trade, and multilateral commitments served as a vivid reminder that even the most formidable powers are not immune to shifts in political mood led by critical decision makers. For India, this is not a matter of judgment, but of prudence. We value partnership with the US deeply, yet we draw from that experience a simple and enduring lessons. Nations must cultivate friends, but rely ultimately on their own strength. And that brings me to Russia. With Russia, India's engagement is anchored in history, forged, as you pointed out, not just through 71, but even earlier, through trials, cooperation, and strategic trust. A relationship that has endured through the passing of eras and the shifting of alignments. Yet history alone cannot be our compass. Russia today stands at complex crossroads, a great power navigating constraint, asserting influence even as its strategic options narrow, and increasingly entwined in dynamics shaped by its deepening proximity to China. To engage Russia at this moment requires neither nostalgia nor estrangement, but the steadiness of a nation that understands both the weight of history and the demands of realism. Therefore, India approaches Moscow with respect, but also with clarity. We recognize Russia as an indispensable actor across Eurasia, a country whose decisions continue to reverberate far beyond its borders. At the same time, we proceed with the conviction that enduring partnerships must evolve, adapt, and reflect present realities rather than past comforts. Our cooperation, whether in defense, energy, or diplomacy, is guided by a single principle: alignment when interests converge, independence where they do not. For India, friendship is never a substitute for judgment, and sentiment can never be a replacement for strategy. China presents, however, without exaggeration, the most consequential strategic challenge of our time. Here is a civilization of great antiquity, a state of immense capacity, and a power whose ambitions and actions shape the destiny of continents. Geography has placed India and China in unavoidable proximity. History has ensured that their relationship will be watched closely by the world. The events along the line of control in recent years have stripped away illusions and restored a fundamental truth long understood by students of statecraft, that peace endures only when it rests upon balance, and that stability requires not merely goodwill but preparedness. India seeks a relationship with China that's stable, respectful, and governed by mutual sensity, but let there be no ambiguity. Sovereignty is not a matter for negotiation, and the defense of territorial integrity is not a choice but a duty. We engage China with patience but with vigilance, with openness but with resolve. For history teaches us that durable coexistence between great neighbors is achieved not through complacency, but through clear boundaries and credible strength. The US remains an indispensable actor in shaping a favorable balance in the Indo-Pacific. Yet, as I said, India engages Washington with clear eyes, appreciative of shared interests, but mindful that American policy, like that of any democracy, is subject to change. Strategic cooperation, therefore, must be accompanied by strategic self-reliance. What is often termed strategic autonomy, sir, in truth is the disciplined practice of sovereign choice. India will work with many, align with none in any exclusive sense, and preserve the freedom to act in accordance with its interests and responsibility. Across the world, particularly among developed nations, there is a growing expectation that the international system must become more representative and equitable. India's engagement is guided by that belief as well. Yet, the ultimate source of national influence is at home. Economic strength, technological progress, and social resilience are the bedrocks upon which strategic credibility is built. India's guiding conviction, then, is simple. Stability is not inherited, it's constructed. Partnerships are valuable, dependence is perilous. Cooperation is desirable, sovereignty is indispensable. Allow me to leave you with three quick reflections. First, in an era of volatility, whether geopolitical or domestic within major powers, strategic autonomy is not an abstraction but a necessity. Second, durable relations require clarity of interest as much as warmth or sentiment. Third, a strong and self-confident India contributes not only to its own security, but to the balance and stability of the wider world. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Can I give you a question from Prashant Kumar in our audience, given in India's strength and confidence? How is India using its G20 Global South leadership to prevent the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, from turning into a Sino-centric bloc? Very quickly, if you can.
I think the G20 was an example, and in fact, the presidency of the G20 was an example of what India can do, its convening power. And similarly, I don't think it's the BRICS is turning out to the Sino-led consortium. In fact, the fact that India is there, along with, say, Brazil, suggests that there is a certain balance. And I think India believes that actually being within these forums not only gives the larger developing world a voice, especially the G20, but even the emerging economies, a certain play and a certain agency.
Thank you. And can I open up now the question from Vinay Gulati? I want to ask it to you and then to the rest of the panel on this theme. As New Delhi and Beijing vie for leadership of the Global South, how does India's democratic and pluralistic narrative compete with China's stability-centric and state-led model? A lovely question. Again, could you just sum it up as succinctly as you can?
Yes, since 1949, since the Maoist revolution, the people have been actually comparing India and China, and over periods of time, there were those who believed that the Chinese model worked. Authoritarian, totalitarian, led by a single party system, could deliver both for its friends and for itself much more than a democratic, noisy, messy India could. But today, at the very least, the jury is out. India has demonstrated that through its democracy, it can provide not only for itself, but can potentially exercise power and exercise power in favor of its friends outside as well.
So can I, Jagannath, Panda, if I could put that thought to you, are we still this democracy and autocracy? Is this still the rivalry and competition, or is it now more complex and regional than that? I think you might be on mute.
Extremely sorry about that, Humphrey. I think when it comes to Global South, we have to take the Chinese account and the Indian account, which are different, which are distinct, and also it has their state narrative, which extends beyond their immediate neighborhood. One is that one fundamental difference between Chinese narrative of Global South and Indian narrative of Global South is that Chinese narrative of Global South is based on a hierarchical model, where China wants to set the narrative, wants to set the tone, how to follow the order. Whereas when it comes to the Global South narrative of India, India advocates for a pluralistic model of voice, pluralistic medium of expression, and that is a fundamental difference. The other point of difference, which is also a kind of competition between China and India when it comes to Global South, is the developmental model. When it comes to China, what we have seen, it comes with a kind of a infrastructure-oriented heavy investment pattern from the Chinese to this Global South developing economies. When it comes to India, we don't really see that kind of investment-oriented, infrastructure-oriented or infrastructure investment-oriented game plan from India. What India brings to the Global South when it comes to development finance model is a capacity building centric model. So that's the fundamental difference. And there probably both China and India differs and compete with each other. If I could
sorry, I just want to move on to Eerishika. Pankaj, do you agree with your fellow panelists on that? And are these two models, are they competing or are they complementary now to each other?
I absolutely agree with what my panelists have said, especially what Dr. Panda echoed. Most definitely, India's democratic model is drawing legitimacy from political pluralism and electoral accountability, institutional transparency. China's model is, of course, more state-centric with the focus on infrastructure, speed and scale. But it does have a hierarchical financing structure, which is, embedded a lot of conditionalities.
And
with respect to whether
yes. So just is either of them a beacon for the rest of the global South?
I think that the models are competitive in nature, and I think they appeal to select members because the global South, again, is not one cohesive unit. You'll have certain areas and regions, yes, that will appeal to the Chinese side and the others to the Indian side. And China's centralized model gives scale, but India's one gives more dependency. So countries seeking diversification rather than dependence are more likely to look at India.
And of course, as we heard, Brazil and Nigeria and other countries will all have their models. And Sreeram, Chaulia, I just want to see if we can nail down how far can India go towards Russia, China, its multipolar leadership, without damaging its relationship with the US?
I think this juggling act has been ongoing, and I think over time
Is there a tipping point? Is there one particular thing that they're going to say in Washington, well, that's too far, you're against us?
Well, no, because like I said, there are structural limitations to how close we can be to China. So on that front, no. But on the Russian side, yeah, more advanced cooperation in energy and defense potentially could happen in the future, although right now we're downsizing actually in response to international developments and also our own calculations. So I don't think we think in that sense that we have to be either with the one side or the other, right? I mean, that's traditionally been India's strength, and rising powers are better off playing this role rather than to be camp followers. The moment you become a camp follower or an ally of a major power, you can never yourself become a great power in the world, And India's long-term objective is to be a leading power or a great power.
Just to get this concept of the American, you are either with us or against us, which has been with it throughout history, is that now finished?
Well, people are being more independent. US allies, I mean, look at countries like Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're like core allies, and they themselves are trying to chart an independent path. I think everybody realizes that there is a kind of emerging multipolarity. It's not yet there right now. You can argue that China and the US are the only two great powers, but then as the power becomes more diffuse, you will see more of that, and the US will be a great power, but one among maybe 4 or 5, not just one out of 2 which can boss around everybody.
Thank you very much. It is now time for Barry Gardiner, the MP and the chair of the Democracy Forum, who's been listening to the arguments, to tell us what we've got right, what we've got wrong, and what he thinks. Barry, over to you.
Humphrey, thank you so much. It used to be said that the best English was spoken in Aberdeen in Scotland. But having listened to Amitabh Mattoo and his elegant eloquence, I can only say that he takes the prize. I loved his phrases. The world is between chapters. We need steadiness of purpose and clarity of mind. India's patience and confidence in its path in the world. And whilst cultivating our friends, India must rely on her own strength. There were some wonderful phrases there, but they weren't just great phrases. They summed up, I think, a lot of the discussion that we've heard today about what it is to recalibrate within a multipolar world, where we've seen the throwing out of the existing liberal order quite so violently by President Trump in his challenge to everyone else. And that has caused the sort of realignment that we've been talking about today. He spoke of Russian-Indian history and said that Russia is still an indispensable actor in Asian affairs. and alignment where interests converge, but realism where they do not. Now, in a sense, he had the benefit of the three previous speakers, but I did feel that he summed up much of the key points that they made. Dr. Chaulia again spoke of that volatile time for India. He talked about the US in terms of and the competition with China in rare earths and in big tech. He talked about the Jaishankar and his comment that some friends are more complicated than others, and the need for this recalibration from US and its destabilization of liberal values. I thought it was particularly interesting that he cited that moment of history in the first Trump administration, where he said that the US did not support India unilaterally over DOCLA because it was pursuing that China trade deal. And of course, that is something that India will not forget, and rightly so. But he also said that, of course, because of that lack of ability to rely on the US as a counterbalance to China, it's important that India now is engaged in mending its fences with China. So also trying to forge alliances with Japan to provide more of a counterbalance itself to the influence of China in Southeast Asia. With Eerishika Pankaj, she spoke of the new normal, a managed conversation, not a renegotiation of trust. And I thought her comments about the purges of the CNC and that debate about whether they showed weakness or strength on the part of President Xi was a very interesting one indeed. But of course, any changes in that pattern may also reflect China's perception of its own need to change its strategy in response to what's going on. And she spoke of the Quad may not have the same priority for the US as it does now for the UK and Japan and so on. So very interesting points there. Jagannath, Panda at the end put his finger on the, in response to that question, Humphrey, that you asked from Vinigalati about the Chinese narrative for the Global South being one of investment in infrastructure, whereas India's was a more pluralistic narrative. And this is really a fascinating distinction that has gone on for so long now between the comparison between India and China, and its different ways of approaching all of the rest of the world. One with a sense of money, dominance, investment, and control, the other with plurality, enabling, and a democratic framework behind it. I thought that Amitabh Mattoo, when he said there is a growing expectation that the global system must become more equitable, I wondered about that. Or was he putting more emphasis than perhaps I did on the word expectation? The expectation may be there, but the power play that is going on, certainly from the US, is not about equity and fairness. It is about a reemergence of power. I think China, too, we're seeing as a power player. And I thought it was interesting when Dr. Chaulia spoke of India wanting to be a great power. Yes, non-alignment is not the option. Multi-alignment, though, is not non-alignment. And you can be multi-aligned with everyone except China, as he said. But India has aspirations. Those aspirations are to be a great power. And for that, it is certainly forging its own path in the world. Fascinating discussion. My thanks to all the panelists for their insightful comments.
Barry Gardiner, thank you very much for that. I want to go very briefly back to our panel, India's recalibration towards Russia and China. Just in one sentence, and one sentence only, please, tell me your conclusion on this. What exactly is happening? Jagannath, Panda.
I think very shortly, India wants to continue in its relationship with Russia and China, anchored based in practical realism. I think this realism is the essence of time.
Thank you very much. Eerishika, Pankaj.
I think that there is not a decisive strategic shift, but rather a very controlled repositioning under pressure that is happening, where India is adjusting behavior while preserving its policy ambiguity.
Sreeram, Chaulia.
Yeah, India will continue to engage with all its major strategic partners, including Russia, and with the longer-term objective of clearing the obstacles to its own rise. And the only external obstacle, the primary obstacle, will remain China, and therefore there will be that adversarial tone to our approach to China going forward, which means that we will want to hunt with the hounds and run with the hares. We will take the Russian embrace, but also tightly clasp the Western hand.
Thank you very much. And Amitabh, Mattoo, give us some of your eloquent sentences, or one's eloquent sentence. You are muted, I think.
Humphrey, I shall respond more philosophically, and by quoting the great Indian thinker Chaulia, who observed that the foremost duty of statecraft is the protection of the realm and the prudent pursuit of its interests, a principle that resonates with undiminished relevance today for India. India shall therefore proceed with calm determination, mindful of risk, confident in our capabilities, and resolved to navigate the uncertainties of the age with wisdom and resolve. Rather than providing you with a prescription, I provide you with this philosophical adage.
Thank you very much. Proceed with calm determination. Time's winged chariot now attacks us, and we must end, but thank you so much for everybody. Jagannath, Panda, Eerishika, Pankaj, Sreeram, Chaulia, and Amitabh, Mattoo. And thank you all at the Democracy Forum for making this debate happen. It's been fascinating. Our next Democracy Forum debate is at the same time at 2 p.m. GMT, March the 10th. And the topic is the march towards global hegemony, undermining democratic and collective responsibility structures. Another big issue. Please join us. And until then, stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists, and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.